Okay, let's get rolling. My name is Nick Hodges, and you are here to listen to a talk about why you should be using TypeScript. You can see my email address, website there. I'm on Twitter if you want to follow me. I usually stay pretty calm on Twitter, usually. If you're curious about me, I'm a former Naval Intelligence officer, which sounds 142 times better on television than it does in real life, believe me. I'm a software development manager at Gateway Ticketing Systems out in the Boyertown, Gilbertsville area, which is west of Philly. We make ticketing systems for many of the largest amusement parks in the world. You know, we have a lot of good stuff going on here. I'm a longtime Delphi developer. I was the Delphi product manager at Borland way back in the day, for those of you who remember Borland. I've written 3 books on Delphi. If you want to know about self-publishing and how to self-publish your books and make a lot of money doing that instead of getting paid very little to publish with a regular publisher, you can talk to me about that. I'd be very interested, very happy to talk to you about it. And I've got a lot of speaking experience. I've been speaking at conferences for years and years. I used to speak in front of thousands of people when I was the Delphi product manager, so that was always fun. The agenda for today is pretty quick. I'm going to talk a little bit about what TypeScript is, and then I'm going to give you 13 reasons why you ought to be using it. If you have any questions, just unmute yourself and pipe in. That's perfectly fine. I won't be offended if you interrupt me. That's not a problem at all. If you want to get into a discussion, we can do that too. That's no problem. So what is TypeScript? Well, TypeScript is basically JavaScript that has types, classes, and modules. And you may think, why is that a big deal? Well, JavaScript, as you probably know, is a dynamically typed language, and that presents a certain set of advantages and a certain set of disadvantages. And there's a great debate in the world, in the developer world, about whether dynamic typing or static typing is better or worse. I cut my teeth on Delphi, as I mentioned, and so I fall into the static typing is good type camp. I'm also a TypeScript fan. One of the reasons I am a TypeScript fan is because of the Anders-Heilsberg connection. TypeScript is a superset of JavaScript that compiles into clean JavaScript, and it is an open source project run by Anders Heilsberg and Microsoft. You can go to Microsoft, or you can go to GitHub, to the Microsoft page and see Anders at work and other Microsoft people and members of the community all at work, commenting, checking things in, approving pull requests. It's all there for the world to see. It's kind of fun to see Anders participating in the community, just like anybody else, just like mere mortals. And it's all available there for you. So a couple things to know about TypeScript. All JavaScript is TypeScript. Now that's a generic statement, a 100% kind of statement. There may be certain little esoteric corner cases of JavaScript that TypeScript will gag on, but that is not generally the case. Generally speaking, if you want to pay me a whole lot of money to come in and consult with you and convert you over to TypeScript, I can take all your JavaScript, change the extensions on the JavaScript files from JS to TS, and boom, we're done. The TypeScript compiler or transpiler will gladly process all of your JavaScript very happily. But TypeScript is, all JavaScript is TypeScript. But of course, TypeScript is not JavaScript. TypeScript is a language that gets transpiled or compiled. I'm going to probably end up using the word compile into JavaScript. I view JavaScript as kind of the assembly language of the browser, and the browser as the new operating system. So this is very similar in notion to the idea of taking C++ code and compiling it into assembler and running it on an Intel processor. It's very similar. You take TypeScript code, compile it into JavaScript code, and run it in the browser. It's a very analogous situation. So that's kind of what TypeScript is all about. So the main purpose of TypeScript, one of the base purposes of starting it and doing it, is to make large-scale JavaScript applications manageable and maintainable. TypeScript introduces the notion of modules and classes, which enable you to break things down into manageable chunks of code that are more usable and more maintainable when building larger enterprise-type systems. So if you're doing Node and you want to build a very large server microservices collection, you can sequester off each individual microservice into its own module. JavaScript has recently added the notion, but TypeScript has had it and adds all the different types as well. The other main benefit that you get out of TypeScript is you get excellent tooling and ease of development around your code. Visual Studio Code, which, by the way, is built with TypeScript and Electron, and is an open source project that you can see on GitHub, is very, very powerful when it comes to IntelliSense and Java and TypeScript. Because TypeScript is strongly typed, you're able to have reflection information about those types, and that type information can be turned into IntelliSense and refactorings and all kinds of goodness inside of the IDE, inside the VS Code IDE, that enable you to really be productive and use all the things you're familiar with in your development environment. So the other thing to remember about TypeScript, because all JavaScript is TypeScript, TypeScript doesn't force anything on you. It's just there to help. As I said, you can become a TypeScript shop by just changing your extensions from JS to TS. So anytime you want, you can just write JavaScript. Anytime you want, you can apply TypeScript types and classes and modules to your JavaScript code. And as long as it gets processed through the TypeScript compiler, you are good to go. And remember, the TypeScript compiler outputs any type of JavaScript you want, I think from ES5 up to the experimental current version of JavaScript, or ECMAScript, whatever you want to call it. So the nice thing about if you want to make a transition is you can do that transition gradually. There's no reason for you to suddenly have your existing JavaScript code base just become obsolete. Not far from it. Okay, so next up we'll talk about 13 reasons why you should be using TypeScript. Ooh, there's a slip. Why you should be using TypeScript. So reason number one, it's very popular and well loved. In the 2020 Stack Overflow survey, TypeScript came in second as the most loved language, and I think it was fourth in the most popular language, whichever the difference is in between that. In any event, TypeScript is very, very popular. It's been growing steadily every year for 10 years since it started, since it was released in 2010, I believe, if not. Maybe it was started in 2010 or released in 2012, something like that. I don't remember. However, nevertheless, it's very popular. It's growing. You won't have trouble finding people who are familiar with it. You won't have trouble finding people who know how to develop in it. And again, if you're a JavaScript developer, you already know how to do TypeScript. You just have to gradually migrate yourself over from JavaScript to TypeScript. So reason number one, it's very popular and well loved. Reason number two, if you're doing JavaScript, you're already doing TypeScript, as I mentioned earlier. In other words, you don't have to make a huge transition. You can make a gradual transition. I made that point before, so I won't belabor it too much more here. But I think it's important. I can imagine a situation, for instance, where you might have 4 developers on a team. 3 of them are very excited about TypeScript, and 1 of them just doesn't like static typing, prefers dynamic typing, and wants to keep doing regular JavaScript. Well, guess what? That's completely possible. It's completely possible to have a blended environment in that way, and you could run a team that way if you so desired. Now, another reason that it's interesting to use TypeScript and why I think you should be using it is it is, as I mentioned earlier, open source. Now, the reason this is a benefit is because, one, the language is open source and backed by Microsoft, so you know that there's a company backing that, and it has the resources to continue to develop and produce new features for TypeScript. Two, you've got some of the best brains in the world working on it, and you can see and have input into what those brains are doing. Three, it's open source, so even if for some crazy reason Microsoft went out of business, the project could continue and the language would continue. In other words, it's not proprietary, it's open source. So, and it has all the benefits that go along with that. Another thing, side note to mention is it moves very quickly. TypeScript releases on a 3-month schedule. They're currently on version 4.2, and they've already got the beta of 4.3 out with an expected release date sometime this spring. And they continue to add all kinds of interesting type system features, language features, and whatnot. And I dare say, of static type languages right now, TypeScript is probably one of the most cutting edge there is in terms of what they're doing and the features and whatnot of the language. Oh, another reason number 4 so far, is TypeScript is familiar. Now, I don't have any code in this presentation, but I can tell you that TypeScript is very similar in many respects to C# or Java or any of your other curly braced languages. In other words, the type system, the way the classes are declared, is very similar to C#. So, for instance, if you're a C# developer, TypeScript probably isn't that huge of a reach. The concepts, the class system, the way of doing business in terms of coding is very, very similar in concept to C# and pretty similar in syntax, actually. A lot of the code that you look at a lot of times, you have to do a little double take if you're looking at TypeScript to make sure you're not reading C# or Java, something like that. You kind of have to examine it because it does have a lot of the similar keywords and directives and whatnot to some of the other statically typed languages. So TypeScript's familiar. It's easy to learn. So another reason to use TypeScript, number 5, TypeScript imposes discipline. So a type system forces you to be very careful about your code. It doesn't, the TypeScript compiler will find all kinds of issues with your code that the JavaScript system would find at runtime. So generally speaking, it's preferable to find errors at compile time as opposed to finding them at runtime. There's a debate about that, of course, because runtime can be test time. But it does impose a certain amount of discipline on your code. There's no force. It'll discover errors like unexpected type coercion, things like that. It also it allows you to implement your code using solid principles, OOP, object-oriented programming, and all that goodness. And so it imposes that kind of discipline upon the code. It enforces the notion of module boundaries, which allow you to decouple your code and keep your concerns separated cleanly. It keeps the notion of importing and exporting from different modules that keep you from getting your fingers involved in code in another module that doesn't want to be involved or shouldn't be involved. So it imposes all those kinds of disciplines upon you as you write your code. Number 6 is TypeScript is scalable. One of the complaints against JavaScript is that the larger the project gets, the more spaghettified your code gets. And I mentioned that in the last item, where TypeScript allows you to have modules that contain code and only expose that code, only expose the code that needs to be exposed for use outside of that given module. That's a very important feature for building enterprise level systems, as I'm sure you're well aware, because again, you can keep things private, you can keep things unexported. that shouldn't be exported. And you can expose only those interfaces as an API to your module that you want exposed. So TypeScript is scalable. This kind of gets back to a point I made earlier, but TypeScript is optional. I talked about this already mostly, so I won't belabor this one either, but it's optional in the sense that, again, you can use the features of TypeScript that you want, and you can just continue to use the JavaScript features elsewhere. If you want to use the notion of modules and then not use classes at all, but just use regular JavaScript inside of modules, you can do that. If you want to use classes and modules, you can just use classes and modules without using any of the other types in this typing systems. You can use any of the types that you want, and you can use any of the features of TypeScript that you want, and use JavaScript in the other places, and you can still build applications, websites, and whatnot using TypeScript as much or as little as you want. So that's a nice feature. Again, you can gradually take your JavaScript and gradually convert it over, or start including TypeScript features into your existing JavaScript code base right now. Number 8, TypeScript catches bugs. I touched on this earlier. TypeScript's got a static typing, and as a result, it will not allow you to pass a string where a number is expected, for instance. Very common error in JavaScript is type coercion, undesired type coercion. JavaScript's compiler at compile time will catch these errors. You can give everything a type. You can set the compiler to be put on strict mode, and it will not allow you to make syntax runtime error, what are often syntax and runtime errors in JavaScript when you compile your TypeScript. So it will catch many bugs. There's studies out there that show that it will catch as many as 15%. It'll reduce the number of bugs that make it into production by 15% by using a statically typed system. That's debatable, I understand. Some people are very into dynamic typing. That's fine. But TypeScript will catch bugs. There's no doubt about that. Number 9, I touched on this at the very beginning. TypeScript has great tooling. If you are using Visual Studio Code, you will find that the IntelliSense, the predictive typing, the refactoring, all those good things that come from having a language that is strongly typed and well-defined, and having the IDE have knowledge of that language, provides you with all the tooling you need to be very, very productive and very, very productive. You can type faster. It'll help you explore and know what is available to you. If you type my class dot and then see the IntelliSense pop up, it'll allow you to explore what is available. It'll allow you to code navigate. You can control click on code and have it navigate to the places, find declaration, that kind of thing. So the TypeScript allows for the really good tooling. Visual Studio Code is written in TypeScript, as I said earlier. So it is very TypeScript aware, and TypeScript is sort of a native language to it. There's a number of plugins and add-ons you can add into Visual Studio Code, but just out of the box, the support for TypeScript is very, very powerful. So that's cool. All right, number 10, TypeScript expands your coding skills. If you're a dynamic developer, dynamic language developer like in JavaScript, TypeScript will allow you to learn to be a statically typed developer. And again, you can do that as gradually as you want. You can do it as slowly as you want, but you'll expand your skills into the world of dynamic or statically typed languages, which is a good thing. It's always good to learn more, understand more, see the world from a different perspective, and that's good. You'll expand your coding skills by using TypeScript. Number 11, I mentioned, this is probably a repeat actually, but TypeScript does compile time checking, and that means that just like in C#, if you have a syntax error, In C#, the compiler will not allow it to be compiled. Same with TypeScript. TypeScript does not compile syntax errors. So it will find syntax errors before they get deployed. That's really important, really good. I appreciate that as a Delphi developer. I'm used to that. And so that's one of the reasons I like TypeScript as well. Another reason to use TypeScript, number 12, is you basically can use all the JavaScript libraries that are already out there. TypeScript requires a typing file for a JavaScript library, but there is a open source project called Definitely Typed out there that takes any new and existing JavaScript libraries, creates the type libraries for that, and allows you to import those types into your TypeScript project and use any project out there that you want. For instance, one of the common ones that's really used a lot in TypeScript is RxJS, which is a reactive system using observables and whatnot. And you can use RxJS in TypeScript just like you would in any other language because the types are imported using a type file that's created by the Definitely Typed project. So you don't give up all the JavaScript libraries that you know and love because you're using TypeScript. In fact, you can use them, and that's one of the benefits. And finally, the last item I'll talk about today is TypeScript runs everywhere. It runs everywhere just like JavaScript runs everywhere. You can use a project. You can use a TypeScript project to build a website. You can use a TypeScript project to build a Windows application using Electron or a Linux application. You can take your TypeScript project that's, well, let me give you an example. Visual Studio Code is written in TypeScript. It is a Windows application. It is a Linux application. It is a Macintosh application. And if you go to a place like stackblitz.io, it is a web application. You can run your IDE inside the browser using TypeScript, a very powerful tool that, with all the IntelliSense and everything like that in the browser using something like TypeScript. Now, of course, you can do that with JavaScript as well, but you get all the benefits of TypeScript and all the benefits of JavaScript as well, and it'll basically run anywhere. JavaScript is the most runnable language in the world, and TypeScript compiles down to JavaScript, and so TypeScript runs everywhere. So this talk didn't go nearly as long as I thought. I apologize for that. I'm almost done. But here's some resources for TypeScript. The official site is typescriptlang.org. The address for the GitHub project is there. A really good book on TypeScript that I read called Pro TypeScript by Steve Fenton is recommended there. You can read my blog about Angular and TypeScript there. And don't forget, if you're not using Visual Studio Code for your JavaScript or TypeScript or whatever kind of language you want, I'd recommend using Visual Studio Code. Very, very powerful tool. So I am done. That's all I have, I'm afraid. I'm sorry if you were expecting more. I'm happy to take any questions that y'all may have.
I know this is kind of off the cuff, but oh, by the way, hi Nick, it's Meg.
Hi, Nick.
Do you want to maybe show us like just basics, like the different variables and types of I don't know, objects in TypeScript and like a little bit of code?
Okay, hang on. Okay, let's see. I gotta share something. I gotta change what I'm sharing then, don't I? Hang on. Okay, let's get rid of that.
Oh, there was I know I think you showed this site before. There was that cool site that had the two, like the side by side where you had the JavaScript in one box and the TypeScript in the other, and it was kind of like would show you.
Yeah. Okay.
Comparison, and that might help because
Yeah, that's a good idea. I'll show that just for fun. That's a good idea. Let's see. I gotta share my browser and get something up on my browser so that I'm not. Let's go to the playground.
Yeah, that was the playground.
Okay, what do you see, Meg? At the present moment, nothing?
Just everybody's.
Everybody? Okay, here we go. Can you see my screen now?
Yeah, that's exactly it.
Okay, yeah, this is an interesting site. It's on the TypeScript Lang. It's called the Playground on the typescriptlang.org site. Let me delete this and I'll grab some. Here's a interesting little Fibonacci function written in TypeScript. It's part of a module. If I type it in here, you'll notice that I use static typing here, for instance. I use this to declare this is a number, and the cache is an array of number here, and the function returns a number. You'll see the add values there. And so this is the TypeScript. What's that?
If you could maybe zoom in just a little bit.
Oh, okay. Is that bigger? Is that
yeah.
better?
Yeah, thank you.
And you can see that the TypeScript compiler produces just raw JavaScript over here. Not too different from the TypeScript. But if I were to do something like, say, class person, like so, and then I were to say private first name string, what's the problem here? Oh, well, I'll worry about that later. And you notice that as I type these private variables, TypeScript, the JavaScript's not doing anything, right? But if I type a constructor, I pass in a first name, so you'll notice now it's starting to do something. So if I say you'll notice that it's starting to create JavaScript on the right, but the typing isn't there. Such, like so. It doesn't like that I'm not initializing these variables. But you can see that the class is created over here. But let's see, if I change the settings, I bet I can. What happened? Whoops. Uh-oh. Well, I'm sorry. I can go like this. Hang on. Open, close tab. Come on, come back. Will that work? Yeah, there we go. So I can say that I want to target ECMAScript 5. You'll notice that what where did the code go? Oh, close. You'll notice that I'm targeting ECMAScript 5, which is sort of the lowest level ECMAScript that is out there. You'll see that I no longer have a class because ECMAScript 2017 has classes in it. But if I want to target the base browser level, you'll notice that what's on the right there, the JavaScript, is, of course, quite different than what we were looking at before and quite different than the TypeScript. So one of the benefits of TypeScript is you can target the JavaScript version level that you want there. And so you can see that it creates a function called person and does some interesting things with the declaration of that using some dynamic programming. And that's what TypeScript does. It compiles the TypeScript object person into very low-level JavaScript. Is that kind of what you were looking for, Meg?
Yeah.
Let's see if I can quick fix. Oh, yeah, I forgot. This should be this. TypeScript's pretty powerful in that regard.
In the constructor on line 5 on the TypeScript side, is that supposed to be a comma or semicolon in between them? Right. Okay, because I didn't know if it was like a syntax thing or not with TypeScript.
It's supposed to be a comma. You're right. Thank you. Yeah. So that's the basic idea. And you can certainly go here and play around with this and create enumerators, you know, like and you can put that inside your class here, and then it creates a JavaScript object out of your enumerator, but you know, the enumerator is, let's see, I remember my syntax very well. So
IntelliSense, right?
I'm not doing a good job typing out my JavaScript, but you get the idea that various features. Oh, it's not this. It's the enumerators, I think. There we go. Whatever. It turns it into an array. Whatever. The enumerator are a powerful feature inside of TypeScript that get converted into JavaScript notation, JSON objects inside of JavaScript. So anyway, quick look. Anybody got any other questions?
Doesn't TypeScript have the tuple?
Oh yeah, of course. Many examples of tuples. Let's see. See if I can find one. TypeScript has generics, tuples. Certainly, it's completely. Here's a wrapping an array type that you know, all kinds of types. You have lists. You can have generic lists. You can have generic anything you want. It has lambdas and anonymous methods. It does all that powerful language stuff. Let me see if there's some basic. Some examples that I could bring up. Objects and arrays. So for instance, here's some constants that become constant. It's more fun in my mind if we make it a lower level version of JavaScript. ES5 makes it more fun to do. You've got constants, you've got arrays, you've got everything you need in JavaScript, but you also have classes. Let me see, where's a good example of a class? Let's see, working with classes. Let's see, classes 101. Here's a class with a vendor that has a greeting on it, and you can see that, let's change the config again to JavaScript ES5. And you can see that the JavaScript that gets created is pretty complex relative to the simplicity of a simple class declaration, for instance. This is then the JavaScript that ends up being the vendor class, you know, and here. But it uses the prototype, it uses functions, it uses functional programming, and it's quite complex, whereas the notion of a class is probably pretty straightforward for folks who are familiar with something like C# or Java or any type of class object-oriented language. Anything else? Okay, thanks very much for coming. Came up a little short on the time, but Meg, thanks for typing the Definitely Typed project in there. That link and GitHub for Definitely Typed is there. Strongly recommend that you give TypeScript a look. And hopefully you learned a little bit about TypeScript in our talk today. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Nick.
All right, thanks, Meg. Thanks, everyone.